All right, so let's get started. A couple of things I'm just going to cover, kind of the big picture, how does Intune fit into the EMS suite, as well as, what's the comparison between MDM and MAM, because a lot of times folk think about Intune as kind of an MDM product, and while that's kind of where a lot of folk are in the industry, that's really not how we necessarily think about it, and not necessarily how it integrates within the EMS suite. Then we'll get into talking about managing access and managing usage. I did happen to see the paperwork that Uday left and talked about conditional access and MAM policies, which is all built on Intune. But we'll see how that goes, and also I'm short on time, so I'm sure we'll be answering a lot of questions. And then the last thing I just want to cover is some things to think about when you're going forward and doing deployments of Intune, as well as some of the other things associated with the EMS suite. So let's jump into it. First thing I like to start off with is kind of what our vision is. What is the vision for our product group? And it's really about helping organizations, enabling them to be productive on their devices, and for that matter, their applications, while making sure we protect the corporate data. And kind of as a side note, the reason we're very specific about data is, a lot of times people think about MDM. MDM, locking down the device and things like that is really just a proxy for protecting what's important to you. You don't actually care. Well, I don't think most customers care. Certainly the ones that I've been speaking to don't necessarily care about locking down the device. The only reason people lock down devices so they can protect the corporate data, which is why we talk more about the MAM capabilities, so mobile application management, and to some degree RMS as well, rather than necessarily the settings and the configuration that these devices allow us to do with MDM. So what is the EMS suite? I'm sure Uday may have had a previous slide that looks very similar to this. Funny that. So in the EMS suite, essentially you got Azure Active Directory Premium, Microsoft Intune, Azure RMS, and Advanced Threat Analytics. We continue to evolve on what kind of products are in this suite. The reason I bring this up is it's not just who were the people around for Microsoft's back office suite when it first came out? Okay, a few people. Okay, so when Microsoft brought out the back office suite, for example, it had Exchange, it had SQL, and it had SMS at that time. There was very little integration between those three products, right? This EMS suite is actually integrated. So a lot of the work we do as far as things like conditional access to online resources and on-prem resources requires an orchestration between Intune and Azure Active Directory. So it's very different from our traditional suite, if you like. It's a lot more integrated than you would expect from previous ones. This is how it actually all ties together. So when we think about protecting corporate data, because at the end of the day, that's what we think we actually want to protect. We do that in defense in depth, and the way we approach that is with the EMS suite. So we're using identity, we're using Azure Active Directory to protect the user identity. Then we're using Intune to protect both the device, yes we have MDM settings, protect the application, your MAM capabilities, and then lastly protecting the data itself. So actually having a security policy on all three of those, the device, the application, and the data being through RMS. This is how our stack kind of looks out, and it's interesting, it's a suite, it's essentially a bunch of services, and when you actually look on the other side, there's a disparate configuration there where you have to end up buying multiple applications in order to get the type of capabilities you're actually looking for. So we start with native MDM. We then look at managing the Office Productivity Suite and actually securing that to make sure that the data that is generated by your users using that suite is protected. We then move on to making sure that only users that are authenticated, devices that are capable of securing that data, are able to access those resources. And then lastly, we're using Azure Rights Management, not just to protect the data as it's being used by your users, but also as you extend that to start sharing that with your partners, whether those are customers, your vendors, your partners, you're able to actually protect for security on the document itself. There we go. So when we think about mobile devices, and I kind of don't necessarily like the term mobile devices because it's actually all devices are pretty much mobile these days, whether they're a PC or whatnot. we've kind of moved to this theory that there's essentially 4 different types of use cases for the device. First of all, there's the unknown device. You can think of that as like the kiosk in the hotel, the internet cafe. I guess those are going away. But it's a device that's not necessarily owned either by the user or by the company. Second to that, we obviously have the unmanaged device. So you can think of that as your personal iPad, your home PC, etc. Then you get onto a managed device, so a mobile device that's probably the company maybe have provided. When we've spoken to customers, depending on countries and cultures, some customers will purchase those devices for the user, sometimes not so much. And then lastly, the shared device. So a lot of customers are starting to use these things. For example, in the retail space, where you're walking around, you're able to show products that may be in stock, check to make sure that they're in stock, get some more details about the exact product itself. But essentially, it's a lockdown device. It's got an online catalog, if you like, or maybe it can take sales, for example. You can use Square, etc., to actually process sales. So as we think about that, you start thinking, well, okay, if I was using a traditional MDM solution, I can do these 2 things. Okay. Obviously, with an MDM solution, you can obviously use things like DEP, Apple's DEP program. Google's working on theirs. Windows 10 has its own as well. You can basically put the device into what's called kiosk mode. It can run 1 or 2 applications, and that's pretty much all it can do. Okay. You can start thinking about managing a device. So you can actually put a management profile. I have one of these devices here that has a management profile on it, and then I can download or push down a set of security policies, such as I can enforce a PIN, I can require encryption, I can also push things down like secure VPN configurations, Wi-Fi configurations. When you start moving to an unmanaged device, it gets a little trickier, because research has shown us, not by ourselves, but by folk like Gartner, that there's a big scary screen when you enroll a device into management that says, if you enroll into device management, the company will be able to wipe your machine. Okay? Their research has shown that users 50% of the time will bail out of that. They will actually cancel at that point. So that makes it hard to actually put an MDM solution that actually takes full control of the device. So the way that Intune has approached that is we actually put the security policies just on the applications themselves. There's actually no management profile on the device itself. We're not even looking at what's on the device. We have no capabilities in the device. We're looking purely at the applications themselves, putting security around those devices. And as we move into this really unknown device, it's not owned by the user, it's not owned by the company, then it gets even more difficult. You have to think about, how do I actually secure the access point that the user is trying to go through, which is probably a web browser, and make sure that they're not able to leak out confidential information. And so there's a lot of work going on that at the moment, basically allowing us to, for example, use Exchange OWA and only be able to look at the email and not actually be able to see the attachments, download the attachments, preview the attachments. So that's what's kind of going on. So when we think about how this plays out, I kind of quickly went through all of that. Nice, pretty slide for you, for those folk that are taking photos. But essentially, you've got your public kiosk. At the moment, we just block everything. So you're able, basically, they don't have any applications that are managed. They don't have any management actually on the device. You pretty much get blocked from everything associated with OWA. There's no provisioning of VPN or Wi-Fi settings that come down to that device. On an unmanaged device, we talked about that. You can actually enable a security policy that comes down with the Office suite of applications, and also can be extended to your applications, to your line of business applications through an SDK and through a wrapper. That allows you to set those settings. When the user logs onto one of your corporate resources, be that SharePoint Online, OneDrive, for example, that security policy is going to come down and just apply to that application. MDM, device is going to be enrolled. Although we've taken a slightly different slant on that, we've kind of provided a carrot and stick solution. Essentially, when the user tries to access email, they will be blocked. They will receive an email that says, hey, you need to enroll your device before you can continue. We provide a walkthrough that they go through. They'll become device enrolled, and then they'll be able to access their email. So it kind of mitigates to some degree the processes you have to follow to get those devices enrolled. It provides a benefit to the user that way. And then for a PC, a lot of the capabilities we've talked about protecting content is all wrapped up into the Windows 10 EDP process. Essentially, that allows you with any application to define that it's going to be within the EDP system. It's going to have a security policy associated with it, and then you're able to protect, making sure that it's not sharing with other applications that are not part of that secure environment. Okay, so that's kind of the high-level stuff. We're going to jump in now and actually get into some of the more details. First, we're going to look at conditional access, which is really providing that secure access to your corporate resources. Then we talk about once a user has access to those resources, how do they then prevent leakage from those mobile applications themselves. And then lastly, we'll kind of tie that together with rights management, so you can actually share that outside the boundaries of your company as well. Conditional access, kind of where we started, kind of where the industry started. A lot of MDM vendors essentially put up a proxy server in the DMZ, and that basically meant that any device that was on the internet that needed to access resources had to go through that proxy server, had to go through that gateway in order to get access to your corporate resources. That kind of works fine when all of your corporate resources are here. You got your Exchange server, you got your SharePoint server. Where it falls down is if you're using O365 and other SaaS-based applications, say SAP, for example. Those proxies, those gateways, those boundaries don't actually apply because the users are using these devices, whether they're using an application or a browser, are actually accessing those resources without going through that proxy server. So the only way that can be done is actually forcing all the users to go through a VPN connection before they can go out to the cloud services. So essentially you're throttling your access to cloud-based services through a corporate VPN. Conditional access, I think Uday probably shared this slide with you already. It was a joint development effort. Essentially, these are the types of conditional access controls. Obviously, a lot of the ones at the top, I know he talked about MFA, I know he talked about user identity and group membership. I won't cover those. They're all available within Azure Active Directory. Devices. So basically, we make sure the device is authenticated. It is MDM managed. So what happens is the user tries to access Exchange Online, Exchange On-Prem, SharePoint Online. Those services actually check to see if the device is under management and if it was also compliant. So I talked about there, MDM managed and compliant. What that means is the first time that user tries to access that resource, it's going to check to see, okay, is the device encrypted? Does it have a PIN? Is it jailbroken or is it not jailbroken? At that point, it will allow access to those resources. However, that's great for the first time, but if that's all we did, then that wouldn't prevent the event that would happen subsequent to that, where a user may decide to jailbreak the device or turn off their PIN. So we want to make sure we're consistently monitoring that, and if the device ever becomes non-compliant, we then again block them from accessing those resources again. Okay, so that's done in conjunction with those services, Exchange On-Prem, Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, with Intune providing the ability for AAD to know whether the device is managed by Intune, and is compliant with those security policies. Okay, so how does it work with O365? Okay, so the admin is going to set up a policy that says this device must be enrolled, it must be encrypted, must have a password set, is not jailbroken. User then logs in, tries to connect to one of those online services. It's going to say that, oh, this device is not encrypted, it doesn't have a passcode, and is jailbroken. We are not going to allow you access to Office 365. Okay, the user is then going to enroll. As part of that enrollment process, there's a series of security policies that are going to come down. That device is then going to be encrypted. The user is going to set a passcode. We'll give them a guided experience to do that, and we'll make sure that that device is not jailbroken. Then they'll have access to O365. So one of the key things here is we actually provide the information to the user so that they know how to remediate that device to bring it back into compliance. So that's one reason why we're very specific about the types of compliance checks we want to do on these devices. We want to make sure that the user can actually do what he wants to do and able to then remediate itself so that he can actually start using the productivity tools he wants to use. This is actually the Intune standalone, as we call it, Intune standalone console. These are the types of policy settings you're able to set. You can see, for example, you can set all the password links, you can make sure it's encrypted, make sure it's jailbroken. It's actually a compliance policy. Then we actually define that we want to actually block Exchange. We want to block Exchange Active Sync. In this case, we're actually setting it for Exchange Online. We can also set it for Exchange On-Prem. In this case, we're doing Exchange Online. We can say what the target groups are, which security groups should be blocked, have this policy applied to them, and actually block them from accessing email if they're non-compliant. We can also choose to block any email for those devices that are not supported by Microsoft Intune. So if there's a set of devices that maybe are not covered, you can also do that as well. And then lastly, you can actually apply exempt groups. So if you've got certain VPs, for example, that maybe you not want to apply just yet, or you want to apply it to them later, you can also apply exemptions as well. So I do have demos, and I'm concerned about time. We'll actually just go through the slide deck, which actually shows you the enrollment process, and then I'll show you some other stuff as well with demos. So the enrollment experience, here's my iPad. I'm going to click on, I'm going to create my email profile, I'm going to put in my email, password, connect next. It's going to go through, it's actually going to then set up that account. When the user sets up that account, this is the one and only email they're actually going to receive in their inbox. And basically it says, your IT department, you can customize some of this message. Basically says, we require additional security before you can access this resource. You click on Getting Start Now. It's then going to bring up the browser to allow you to then install the Intune company portal. That's how we do a lot of this orchestration. That's how we pull down the policies. It's going to do that. And then, this is the part that I was talking about earlier. It's going to show you the step-by-step process it's going to go through to actually do the enrollment. So it's going to do enrollment first, then it's going to do compliance check, and then it's going to activate it. So we're going to do the enrollment. It's going to go through, it's going to download the management profile. That's now done. The device is now enrolled. Okay. As you can see though, it's still non-compliant. So then we need to actually remediate it, make sure that it is compliant. Once that's done, we can, the enrollment is then going to be activated, and the user will then have access to their email and see all the email that they've got. So how does this all work? Okay, so let's talk about Exchange email for on-prem. Unfortunately, I didn't build these slides, and I'm not quite sure why they decided to do that. So let's just build the whole slide, and then I can talk about it. Okay, interesting build slide. Okay, so we've got our EAS client down here, down the bottom. Okay, so what's going to happen is they're actually going to then try to access the Exchange on-prem server. Okay, Intune is actually at the top here, is going to manage which devices it blocks and blocks access to. By default, this device will be potentially unknown because it hasn't enrolled yet. So they're going to get this quarantine message. The quarantine message is going to explain to them how to enroll. Once they've enrolled, then Intune is actually going to update both Azure Active Directory. In this case, with Exchange On-Prem, there's actually a connector between Intune and the on-prem Exchange server that then is going to update the on-prem Exchange server to say that this device is now unblocked, that it is managed, it is compliant, is therefore able to access email. Okay. Okay, this one builds a bit better. Okay, so if I'm using the Outlook app and I'm using it on iOS or Android, it's going to do the same thing. It's going to try to authenticate against Azure Active Directory. This is why I kind of brought up the whole notion of the fact that, this is an Intune capability, but it's very much tied to Azure Active Directory and the rest of the EMS suite. In this case, Azure Active Directory is going to then redirect to the Intune. We're going to ask for the device to be enrolled. We're then going to enroll the device into Intune. Intune is then going to pass through that information back to Azure Active Directory. We're going to say that it is now managed and is compliant. Azure Active Directory is then going to issue that access token, and the Outlook app is then going to be able to connect to the Outlook cloud service and then be able to access Office 365. Yeah.
So active sync in this scenario is the same as it was for Exchange on-prem?
It's very similar. Obviously, there's the with Exchange on-prem, there's more work that gets done between the Intune service and the Exchange server to actually do a lot of the blocking, but they're very, very similar. The difference is in the way that obviously the Outlook app then accesses O365. So the way that we present that back to the Outlook app is slightly different than if you're using the native Mail app, for example. So that's really the big difference here.
But you can do this with active sync against Exchange Online?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yep. It's just a slight variation if you're using the Outlook. Yeah. There's active sync, and then think of it as then there's the Outlook app, and they're kind of slightly different. Okay, I'm going to skip that. Essentially, it's the same flow. So that's kind of conditional access as it applies to Intune. That's how it applies to SharePoint Online, Exchange, on-prem, and cloud. Kind of on top of that, obviously, you've got conditional access with Azure Active Directory using things like the MFA, and actually being able to then encourage the users to then use MFA before they can access those resources. I'm sure Uday went through a whole bunch of this all this morning, so I'm not going to cover too much more of that. Any questions on kind of conditional access? Okay. We do have another session. There's an NDA session tomorrow. That's going to talk about some of the other types of conditional access that will be coming out by the EMS suite. In the next 6 to 12 months, there's some additional scenarios we will be lighting up around conditional access, being able to access those resources from different types of either devices or applications, etc. So I'm not going to cover that now. A separate session for that. So that's kind of conditional access. It's very much a MDM style capability. Essentially, allows that managed device to access resources. So now we switch gears a little bit and we start thinking about mobile application management. And what mobile application management does, and the way that Intune and in this case Office have gone about approaching this, is rather than having necessarily a container in which all the applications that you're managing are stored in that container, we actually have the security capabilities within those applications themselves. So there is an Intune SDK. The Office team has onboarded that Intune SDK. And additionally, they've enabled it to have the ability to apply those security policies just to your corporate data or your corporate persona within those Office suite of applications. So today, Office is one of the few applications that allows you to have a corporate persona and a personal persona. We don't touch the personal persona. We only touch the corporate persona. We're able to apply security policies just to that corporate persona. Those applications exist on the device just as any other personal app exists on the device. However, they behave a little differently when you go in them and try to access corporate resources. Okay, so what is the security policy that we apply to applications? What does it actually contain? It allows you to require a PIN when you launch the application, and also requires you to do authentication, corporate authentication, when you access that application as well. It also enables you to verify the device health, for example, whether the device is jailbroken. If any of those fail, you've put the wrong PIN in, you don't apply a PIN, the application won't actually start up. Okay. After that, obviously, we do things like block, cut, and paste, as well as we control where you're able to save the content, the corporate content to. So, for example, you can't open up a SharePoint document and then try and save it locally. It will be blocked from saving locally. Today we can save it to OneDrive, we can save it to SharePoint Online. We're obviously working with some partners including Box that will allow us to save it to your corporate Box environment as well. And then lastly, of course, once the user's been using all this data, been using these applications, and then they lose the device, you want to make sure you can actually wipe it, right? So you can do a selective wipe. With the Office suite of applications, it won't necessarily remove the application because there could be personal data associated with that, but it will wipe out all of your corporate data that's on that device. And then during that period, of course, we want to make sure that that data is actually encrypted associated with that application. Okay. Very important point here, with the MAM capabilities that we have in Intune today, you can actually use that on top of a device that may be using another MDM solution to do that device management. Obviously, you're not going to get any integration with like conditional access from Intune, but you're certainly, if you've already got another MDM vendor, and or if you've got a device where you don't actually want to manage, say be a BYOD device, that you don't actually want to manage the device, you're able to just use the MAM capabilities on that device itself. So you don't have to get into the business of managing those personal devices. So there's two ways essentially you can implement MAM. You can implement MAM on top of an MDM, obviously we'd like that to be Intune, or you can apply just the MAM capabilities by themselves with no management layer on that as well. Okay. I kind of covered all that before. Basically, what happens is when the user authenticates, they're going to authenticate to Azure Active Directory. As part of that authentication process, when they're trying to access, O365 services, we're actually going to be able to push down security policies for those applications as that occurs. Okay, I'm going to pause here for a minute and kind of go through some demonstrations of that. Hopefully this lights up. While it's loading up, I can always put in my super secret password. Okay, so on this device, we have settings, and if I go into my settings, you'll see that in the general settings, there is no management profile. If you look down here, I think it comes just before the Intune, the iTunes Wi-Fi sync. There's usually a management profile setting there. There is no management profile settings on this device. It's just got the MAM capabilities by themselves. If I go into Outlook, for example, we talked about the multiple personas. Apparently it's timed out, so I have to log in. Good thing is this is a super secret password, and if I type fast enough, people won't be able to read it. So we're logging in here. You can see that with Outlook, for example, I have two profiles. So I have my craigmo930 at hotmail.com, my personal profile. I also have Adam Brooks at my demo environment. So what happens when it times out while you're looking at it between demos? Okay, so here you can see it's actually prompting. What happened was I had an email open, so it asked for my authentication. Now it's actually asking me for my PIN. This is a PIN just on the application. So even if I had this device and I had no PIN on the device itself, I could have a PIN on the application. The PIN obviously is stored locally. It's not something that's synchronized between devices. You can see here I have a series of applications available, a series of emails that I've sent to myself. First one we'll look at is actually a URL. So this is it's a public URL, but because it's sent to I sent it through my corporate email, it's actually going to open up in the managed browser. And you can see that it's opening that up. It's always good when the Wi-Fi works. So what I'm going to do now, if I can use my fat fingers. Apparently I can't. There we go. All right. So if I go in here, then I go back to Outlook. If I go to create an email now, so at this point I'm using my corporate email. I know it's really small on the screen, but I'm using Adam Brooks. I can actually go in here and I can actually paste that. Okay, so I just copied the word users. Now if I try and switch, it's going to come up and say, hey, you just opened this from a managed application. We're not going to allow you to actually take that content and actually be able to switch the email profiles. Okay, same thing as if I tried to actually come out of here, create a new email, switch to this environment, and then try to paste it here. Again, I'm not going to be able to paste. So it understands the context of whether you're trying to switch and if you're trying to do something that's not quite legit. Kind of in the interest of time, I'm going to cover some of the things in RMS as well. So this is an email I actually sent from my corporate email, so from my Microsoft.com account. And so what I'm trying to do here is actually share a PowerPoint presentation with this particular user, this Adam Brooks. You can see here that it has the PowerPoint presentation attached. This is actually a link to that PowerPoint. It's not actually the PowerPoint itself. It's actually a reference to a version of that that's stored within RMS. And basically what this allows me to do is if Adam Brooks was a partner of mine, I can share this PowerPoint with him. But it's going to say, hey, in order to be able to access these attachments, you need to actually have an RMS account. And what it actually means is you need to have an Azure Active Directory account before I can validate that you are who you say you are and that who Craig is going to provide permissions to you to open this document. If I click on that link, it's going to bring up this screen that says, hey, you need to go and create your own RMS account. If the person that you're sharing it with doesn't actually have an Azure Active Directory account at this point, it will allow them to actually create a very simple account within your AAD tenant and allow them to have permissions to open up that document. Once they open up that document, again, you can do things like prevent them from printing, prevent them from forwarding, replying all, for example, etc. You can also revoke that document at any point in time. Some of the scenarios I've heard talking to customers is the mortgage application. When you get a mortgage, you get 30 days to use that, essentially that approval for that mortgage, and then it becomes null and void. Well, what this company is able to do is actually apply RMS and say that revoke this document after 30 days. So even if they have that document in their email, as soon as they try to open it up, it's actually going to block them from opening up that document, and thereby not having to have that company try and manage those mortgage applications. Okay, given where I'm just thinking on the fly here. So a lot of questions we get at Microsoft around, well, I've got O365 and it has some MFA and it has some RMS and it has some basic MDM management. What am I getting from the MS Suite above and beyond what O365 provides today? Okay, so first of all, you're getting a lot of the capabilities that you normally see for O365 when you're thinking about Azure Active Directory, but for your own line of business applications. So for example, you're able to do MFA for your own line of business applications and also third-party applications as well. You also get a lot of that self-service group management. Most of the companies that I talk to, their number one help desk call is to reset a password. Okay, so being able to do self-service reset is probably the number one request. Second to that would be, I need this application installed on my device. And so that's where things like a company portal, a self-service portal that allows the user to install their own applications comes into play. That's what you get with an MDM solution above and beyond the basic capabilities of what MDM provides in O365. A lot of the MDM settings that are in O365 are really just about configuring that device, making sure it's encrypted, making sure there's a PIN, that sort of thing. You don't get all of the capabilities to do mobile application management, for example, pushing out applications, etc., if you're just using O365. And then RMS, of course, you can then use it, do the email notifications when the documents are shared. You're actually able to track where a particular user is opening up that document, as well as understand when the documents are tried to be opened by people that you didn't give permission to as well. So that's kind of how the EMS suite sits on top of O365. You've spent quite a bit of time today going through a lot of the capabilities of the EMS suite. We continue, so if you talk to AAD, they're shipping features extremely regularly. Intune is shipping updates to their service once a month. We've been doing that for about 1.5 years now. Since January of 2015, we have updated the service continuing to bolster that service as well as adding features to that service every month. And the same for RMS. There's actually some interesting stuff coming out that you'll probably hear about tomorrow. So how does the EMS suite work with Windows 10? And so there's been a lot of work gone on to Windows 10, and certainly a lot of work coming out this year focused on enterprise management for Windows 10. As we know, it has its own native MDM stack in there now. They essentially took the Windows Phone stack, put it on steroids, and installed it onto Windows 10 across the platform. A lot of great capabilities in there, not the least of which is the auto-enrollment process. So if a user gets a device, they get it out of the box, you fire it up, it authenticates to Azure Active Directory, it then is able to then push down the settings and the applications through an automatic MDM enrollment as part of that enrollment process. A lot of the MDM capabilities, the mobile application management, that's where your EDP story comes into play. So Microsoft took a slightly different tack than say, iOS and Android, whereby rather than looking at enterprise mobility vendors to provide those application management capabilities, they've actually built it into the operating system itself. So rather than you having to wrap particular applications, that is actually provided at an OS level. So you will essentially have a whitelist of applications that says, these are the ones that are my corporate applications. I want to make sure that they're secure. I don't want these applications sharing content with other applications. And so therefore, we're able to actually push down policies without necessarily having to have a wrapper or an SDK on those applications to allow them to understand what that security policy, that security posture actually is. And then, so any questions on that? I know we're kind of long on time, and I just want to quickly talk about deployment options with Intune. So first of all, obviously, if you've already got AAD, you've already got O365, all of your user identity is taken care of. It's a very simple process to then integrate Intune into that solution that you've already got. The other thing is if you're already using Configuration Manager, there's two ways you can use Intune. You can either use Intune Standalone, which was some of the screenshots I showed there was the Intune Standalone UI. You can also integrate Intune into Configuration Manager. So for those of you that are using Configuration Manager, the way I kind of talk about that is you can essentially think of Intune as a management point and a distribution point in the cloud for your existing Configuration Manager environment. You're essentially using the admin console for Configuration Manager to manage your mobile devices the same way that you're managing your PCs, your Linux servers, etc. today with Configuration Manager. So it's no big transition for your administrators to then know how to manage your mobile devices. With conditional access, if you're going down the path of enabling conditional access, one of the things we can do is actually deploy that compliance policy prior to actually activating conditional access. That allows you to determine which users are going to be affected because they're non-compliant with your security policy before you turn it on, right? So you can go and contact those users and say, hey, this device is going to be blocked from email unless you take care of these steps. Okay, so that's a great thing. You can actually make sure that they're compliant before you actually enforce conditional access. Apart from the spelling mistakes, the next point is that we see far greater uptake in enrollment of mobile devices than you would traditionally see by forcing or asking the user via email or whatever the case may be to enroll their devices. Users are much more likely to enroll in conditional access when they don't have email. Kind of a no-brainer. And then the last point, we kind of talked about that already, is the application management. You can do that with MDM if you want to take full control of the device, both the device and the applications, or you can just manage the applications themselves without having to necessarily take control or ownership of the mobile device itself, or if you have an existing MDM that you're already using to provide that type of security. One thing I will mention, just in closing, since other folk ran long, you may have actually seen this little screen. Helps if I change. I could see it. So when I talked about MAM, Mobile Application Management. This is actually being integrated into the new Azure UI, as is Azure Active Directory, etc. This is running on the iPad. Okay, so I'm actually able to do all my administrative work if I wanted to on a mobile device anywhere in the world. Okay, so I don't have to VPN in. We can do. I can actually look at the actual settings on this application, on this policy, security policy. You can see I'm able to navigate around. You can see, for example, where am I going? Application policy. There we go. What I wanted to show you is this is the list of applications that currently support the MAM capabilities. So there's a fairly extensive list coming out from Microsoft. We continue to iterate on that. I won't talk about some of the other things you may have seen that were on that screen. Simon will talk about that tomorrow. So I know I'm conscious of time. Any questions on kind of stuff we've covered today? It was kind of really quick, sorry.
Is there anything with any of the solutions, MDM or MAM or any of those that allow you to protect against data breaches with screenshots and things like that?
So the question is there anything within various mobility solutions that allow you to prevent against things like Slingshot? So screenshots. Sorry, I was going to go Slingshot, but that's an entirely different topic. Screenshots. There isn't actually. Screenshots, yes. Screenshots by going like this, not so much.
Well, sure.
Right. So screenshots, yes, you can kind of prevent that. There's actually a setting policy that you have in various devices that prevents you from doing screenshots. This part is being worked on by Microsoft Research and other research organizations. I don't know if you've seen, like when you watch the news, for example, and they've got the PCs sitting in the background and they're flickering, they're working on that so that you can't actually. So if you go like this and this, you won't be able to take a photo. But that's a while away. Like a real while away. Sorry. Anything else? Yes?
Are they working on an Android implementation for it?
Oh, sorry. Yes, absolutely. There is already an Android implementation. I just happen to have an iPad. So this is my demo tenant. It just happens to have all the applications. So all of these applications you'll see for iOS are also available for Android as well. There is sometimes some different timings associated with when they release. It kind of comes down to purely when that particular office team and when they ship. They kind of go by market share, unfortunately. So, but yes, Android. For the most part, the MAM capabilities, because they're not relying too much on Android capabilities, they work pretty well against most Android devices. I will say with a lot of the MDM capabilities that tend to occur on an Android device, your results vary. Unfortunately, Android is not a standard. So I spoke to one customer. They said they had 1,200 different flavors of Android running in their environment. So just a word of caution. What I normally recommend customers do if they've got a lot of users that are using Androids, especially with BYOD, you really don't have it. You can't control it. I tell them, why don't you generate a recommended list and say, here's a recommended list of devices we know work really, really well with this experience. And then you provide that list of devices to users. At least you know those ones work, and if the users run into problems, you can say, well, we can troubleshoot it, but this is the recommended list. So certainly Samsung kind of is in, I would say there's like, iOS is really good to manage, Windows is really good to manage. Samsung's not far away, and then you've got everything else that's Android, and Android kind of tails off like this. So, great question, though. Yes?
Can you make the version of Android a condition in your policy?
Yes, so you can actually say this is the minimum and maximum level of Android that I want on these devices. Same is true. You can also specify the min-max versions of any of the mobile device platforms. So, for example, when iOS, removes support for a particular version, you can also do that within your environment as well, so that you're actually getting that environment. And they'll actually provide notification that says that they need to upgrade in order for it to work. Yep. You can't say platforms, but you can say versions, right? Because you can't say this particular flavor of Android, but you can say the versions of Android. There's 1,200 at least that somebody knows about. So who wants to manage that? But you can say version 4, version 5, etc. These are the ones I want to support in my environment. Thank you.
Actually,